Thanks for watching Endgame Economics. If you enjoyed this video, hit subscribe. It's completely free for you, and it helps us continue making more videos like this.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're performing a bit of an economic autopsy on a nuclear-armed state with a population larger than Brazil, and a strategic location that literally makes superpowers drool. Yet somehow, this is an economy that's currently on life support. We're going to strip away the propaganda, look at the cold, hard realities of Pakistan's economy, and try to figure out exactly why it's become the world's permanent patient.
I want you to picture this for a second. It's August 2023. You're standing in your kitchen in Karachi or Lahore. The air is suffocatingly hot, but your fan is switched off. In your trembling hands, you're holding your monthly electricity bill. And it reads 45,000 rupees. Now, you glance over at your salary slip. 50,000 rupees. You aren't poor in the traditional sense, right? You've got a degree, you've got a job, but suddenly you are completely drowning.
So you do the brutal math, and you're left with exactly 5,000 rupees. To put that into perspective, that's about 18 US dollars. 18 bucks left to feed your family, pay for gas, buy school supplies, and somehow survive for the next 30 days. It's impossible. And this impossible math is exactly what sparked millions of middle-class citizens to take to the streets, literally burning their utility bills in bonfires. But here's the really dark punchline to all this. While everyday households are forced to decide between keeping the lights on and buying food, the country itself is doing the exact same thing on a massive macro scale.
To really wrap our heads around this, we have to talk about the International Monetary Fund, or the IMF. Now, most countries treat the IMF kind of like an emergency room. You go there when you're having a massive financial heart attack, you get stabilized, you go through your painful rehab, and you leave. Hopefully for good. But Pakistan? Pakistan treats the IMF like a local dive bar. It walks in, orders around, gets kicked out, and then shows up the very next week wearing a fake mustache asking for more cash.
And that deep structural addiction brings us to a pretty staggering number. 24. Since 1958, Pakistan has gone back to the IMF for 24 separate bailouts. I mean, that is a world record contending number. It puts the country in the exact same league as Argentina, which is basically the undisputed heavyweight champion of defaulting on debt.
Just to build some context here, look at neighboring India. They visited the IMF in a major way exactly once, back in 1991. They fixed their structural issues, and they moved on. Pakistan, meanwhile, practically forwards its mail to Washington, D.C. Let's look at the recent timeline. By 2022, Pakistan was teetering on the edge of a total sovereign default. By May 2023, inflation hit a mind-boggling 38%. And by September 2024, you guessed it, they secured yet another $7 billion IMF bailout. So why does this keep happening over and over again? Well, it's this relentless four-phase boom and bust cycle that almost every single government ends up repeating. Phase 1 is the party. The government spends money it just doesn't have, artificially props up the dollar, and builds massive highways. GDP hits 5% and everyone feels great. But then comes Phase 2, the hangover. Because the country imports pretty much everything and exports very little, it just starts bleeding dollars. Then Phase 3 is the crash. Foreign reserves dry up, the currency goes into a freefall, and inflation completely spikes. And finally, Phase 4, the begging bowl. The government frantically asks friendly countries to roll over their deposits before ultimately running right back to the IMF. Now, you'll hear a lot of people blaming the IMF for all the harsh conditions and high prices that inevitably follow. It's the illusion of the villain. But there's a really brilliant point to be made here. Blaming the IMF for your misery is a lot like blaming your doctor for the chemotherapy. Yes, the chemo makes you violently sick, but it's the cancer that's actually killing you. The IMF is merely the lender of last resort. Those painful conditions, they're treating a self-inflicted disease of consuming way more than you produce.
So what exactly happens when a country consumes without producing for decades? Well, let's look at the 1990s. Back then, Pakistan and Vietnam had roughly the same export numbers. Fast forward to today, and the contrast is just wild. Vietnam is exporting over $300 billion worth of goods every single year. Pakistan? It struggles to even hit $30 billion. Essentially, Vietnam became the factory of the world, while Pakistan morphed into a security state that struggles to export much of anything at all.
And this chronic lack of exports leads straight into a massive, suffocating debt trap. Get this. In recent years, up to 60% of the entire national budget goes purely to paying the interest on previous loans. Not paying down the principal debt, mind you, just the interest.
Imagine earning $100 and having to immediately hand 60 of it over to the bank. It literally forces the country to borrow even more money just to pay the interest on the old money. It's a total vicious cycle. But wait, surely someone is benefiting from all this chaos, right? Oh, absolutely. Enter the concept of elite capture. A total bombshell of a UNDP report recently revealed that Pakistan's elite, we're talking the corporate sector, the feudal landlords, the military, and the political class, receive economic privileges worth $17.4 billion every single year. Let that sink in. The country is out there begging the IMF for $1 billion bailout installments while simultaneously handing out over $17 billion in perks to its absolute richest citizens.
And the weapon of choice for this elite capture? It's something called the SRO, or Statutory Regulatory Order. And this brilliantly illustrates how the whole game is rigged. An SRO is essentially a magical piece of paper signed by some bureaucrat at midnight that instantly alters tax rates for specific industries. So instead of innovating or competing, an industrialist can just get an SRO passed to slap huge import taxes on a competitor. The auto industry has been protected exactly like this for 30 years, turning out outdated, expensive cars. Meanwhile, sugar barons use state subsidies to manipulate exports and imports for massive windfalls. It is the textbook definition of privatized profits and socialized losses.
And this exact system of socialized losses extends right into the energy sector, which has become an absolute death spiral. To understand these capacity payments, think of it like booking a massive wedding hall. Say you book and pay for food for 500 guests, but only 50 actually show up. In Pakistan's energy sector, because of these ironclad take-or-pay contracts with independent power producers, the government still has to pay for all 500 plates regardless. The country has built up 40,000 megawatts of power capacity, but in the winter, demand drops to like 10,000. Yet, they are legally bound to pay those power plants as if they're running at full blast.
And the cost of that? Those capacity payments are projected to hit a staggering 2.1 trillion rupees for 2024 and 2025. This has triggered what's known as the solar death spiral. Remember those desperate middle-class citizens facing massive 45,000 rupee electric bills? Well, anyone who can afford it is leaving the national grid by installing solar panels. But because the government still has to pay that massive fixed wedding hall cost we just talked about, they are forced to raise the electricity prices even higher on the poorer folks who are left behind on the grid. It's wild.
So, while legitimate factories are actually shutting their doors because they simply can't afford to keep the lights on, one sector is absolutely booming: real estate. Let's compare two guys. Man A decides to build a textile factory. He creates jobs, pays customs duties, deals with endless red tape and bribes, and at the end of the day gets hit with a 29% corporate tax. Now look at Man B. He buys an empty dirt plot, sits on his couch watching Netflix for 3 years while the price doubles, sells it, and pays virtually zero tax. The entire system aggressively punishes the value creator and heavily rewards the couch-sitting speculator.
And this has created what's essentially a plot economy. Trillions of rupees are completely frozen in empty lots. People are out there trading NFT files, which are basically just futures contracts for dirt, in housing societies that haven't even been built yet. And it gets worse with the DC rate scam. Here's how it works. You buy a house for 5 crore rupees at the actual market rate, but you legally document the sale at the ridiculously low official DC rate of, say, 50 lakh. The entire difference is untraced black money, which is then routinely cleaned through convenient government tax amnesty schemes. It's literally a giant washing machine for illicit wealth, and it's eating the country's industrial future alive to fuel a property bubble.
So with all this incredible wealth flying around in real estate and luxury cars, why is the government totally broke? Welcome to the Tax Evasion Olympics. In a country of roughly 240 million people, there are only about 5.2 million active tax filers. I mean, the tax base is microscopic. And it's not that the state can't find where the money is, it's that they're terrified of the people who have it. Case in point, when the government recently tried to formally tax retailers through the Tajir Dose scheme, the traders just shut down the country, threatened the state, and the government simply blinked and backed down.
And then, of course, you have the massive feudal black hole. Agriculture makes up roughly 23% of Pakistan's entire GDP, but it contributes less than 1% to the total tax revenue. How is that even possible? Well, it's pretty simple when you realize that the politicians writing the tax laws in Parliament are often the exact same feudal lords who own all the land. They essentially write the rules to ensure their own wealth remains virtually untouched.
So if the rich aren't paying, who actually pays the price? The salaried martyr. The untaxed elites, those retailers and feudal lords we just mentioned, they pay next to nothing. Meanwhile, the salaried class, your teachers, your IT workers, your middle managers, they are squeezed entirely dry. This is a crazy stat, but shockingly, the salaried class in Pakistan pays more income tax than the entire export sector combined. They're the sacrificial lambs of the economy because they are literally the only ones whose tax is automatically deducted at the source. They can't hide.
And that intense, relentless squeeze leads to probably the most heartbreaking symptom of this whole crisis. When everyday people realize the system is literally designed to punish honesty and hard work, they just leave. In 2023 alone, over 800,000 Pakistanis packed up and left the country. And we're not just talking about manual labor here. This is a massive, catastrophic brain drain of doctors, engineers, accountants, and PhDs. You can eventually scrape together the cash to pay back an IMF loan, but a nation cannot easily buy back an evacuated generation of its brightest minds once they've lost hope.
So, is there a cure for all of this? Yes, absolutely. But let me be clear, it's not going to be found in yet another loan or some friendly deposit from an ally. The only real cure is a hard reset. Pakistan has an incredibly resilient population. But guys, resilience is not a strategy. Mere survival is not success. To actually fix this, the permanent patient needs to forcefully rip out the IV drip. And that means making the currently very comfortable elite finally feel the economic pain.
The prognosis requires a pretty brutal but absolutely necessary four-step cure. Number 1. Tax the holy cows. The retailers, real estate moguls, and the agricultural lords absolutely must pay their fair share. Number 2, privatize the bleeding state-owned enterprises. If an airline or a steel mill can't turn a profit, the state has no business running it at a loss on the taxpayer's dime. Number 3, end the energy racket. Those incredibly messy, one-sided power contracts need to be renegotiated. And finally, number 4, invest heavily in human capital. The country needs to transition to exporting software code and tech rather than just relying on raw cotton.
History usually tells us that real reform only happens when the elites themselves feel the walls closing in. We're not quite there yet, but we are definitely getting very, very close. Which leaves us with the ultimate question. Will the patient finally take the painful cure? Or is this country inevitably destined for IMF bailout number 25? It's a fascinating, complex, and highly critical situation to watch unfold. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and as always, keep questioning the data.